As a result of the tragedy, the runway was extended to 9,000 feet. To accommodate the length, it had to be built out into the ocean, on concrete supports.
It's on stilts at either end, so although the runway's perfectly good, you know that if you go over the end, it's not going to be nice because you've got a 60-foot drop there.
So far, no aeroplane has dropped off the end of the extended runway at Madeira. Eagle Vale is number 8 on the list. When it comes to flying in mountainous areas, this is one of the most dangerous. It serves the ski resort of Vail in the Rocky Mountains of Central America.
Mountain flying is the overall awareness of the terrain threat area.
It changes all the time. Weather, snow, visibility. This tends to keep us on our toes and gives us a certain level of alertness.
Vail is one of the more challenging airports in the United States, if not the Northern Hemisphere.
You get turbulence from the wind, you get high altitude, which decreases the performance of the aircraft.
It's not like flying across the prairies. The altitude affects the airplane. You lose about 3% of the engine horsepower for every 1,000 feet you go up. So if you go up 10,000 feet, you've lost 30% of your horsepower. And the airplanes just don't perform.
The higher you get in the atmosphere, the thinner the air. It's less dense. And those air molecules are what an aircraft uses to create lift over a wing, and then the engines also use that to create thrust or energy to move the aircraft around.
To make up for the lack of horsepower, pilots have to increase their speed, and that causes problems at Eagle Vale.
If you're going faster over the ground, that means you cover more runway when you land. And on a departure, the airplane requires more runway for takeoff and requires actually more ground speed. So that's one of the challenges that you face.
But that has not solved all the problems of landing here.
One of the things about flying to Vail is that it's in a valley. That initially limits the lateral movement you have that you can get into the airport. But these are Rocky Mountains. They're 10, 11, 12,000 feet. So you have to go in over the top of the mountain, then descend down into the airport, keeping in mind that there's probably weather a good chunk of the year in there. You're going to have fog and things like this. So you're limited in which way you can descend down.
It can be challenging from the standpoint of the weather when it's reported at the beginning of the approach can be absolutely marvelous. When we are halfway into the approach, a snowstorm or squall can move in and bring our visibility down to a point that it's below what we call our minimums, and we have to go around and try it again.
The valley can be especially difficult for new pilots, sometimes with tragic consequences.
People don't respect the altitude. And if somebody comes from the prairies and tries to fly up a canyon or up a valley, a lot of times won't make it out. I've lost several friends that way that didn't make it, and they all went down. You just have to be careful, and you have to respect the weather. It can change quick.
Eagle has a lot of precision to it. It requires that the captain have currency into that airport every 18 months. And it requires a special checkout from a check airman, both a landing and a departure.
The departure follows a very precise path through an area they call Cottonwood Pass that allows for terrain clearance for the larger commercial airplanes. It's a very precise maneuver from the time you take off till you reach terrain clearance altitude and are headed towards your cruise altitude.
Takeoff brief. Okay, it's going to be a standard brief. We'll be straight ahead at 400 feet, left turn at 250.
Because you're dealing with the quick turnout to follow Cottonwood Pass.
Rotate. Now the spoilers are on.
At 400 feet, we start a left-hand turn, which allows us to fly through a valley, avoiding some of the highest terrain in the area. What what that allows you to do is, worst case scenario, if you were to lose an engine on the departure roll, you would still maintain obstacle clearance through a valley, allowing you to miss all the terrain, deal with the emergency, and hopefully return here or go somewhere else.
Eagle Tower, November, Vienna, Juliet, approaching wheel, Leone 825, convoy is in sight.
Here, with the terrain and the steep gradients that we have to land in, and the possible poor weather, makes us a little more alert, a little more aware of what's going on. And you kind of wear the airplane coming into a place like this versus just being complacent with some of the easier airports.
Each of the world's Courchevel Airport flies in at number 7. It's situated high in the French Alps and has a perilously short roller coaster runway.
Well, there's a ski jump at one end, and it's like a roller coaster at Magic Mountain going along it.
It's at 6,500 feet on the altitude. 1,700 feet is it for runway length. And then the slope is just unbelievable. It's 18.5 degrees going one direction.
The airstrip was constructed in 1961, designed to bring holidaymakers to the isolated mountain town. With no flat area for miles around, the construction company had to carve the runway out of the mountainside.
From one direction, it is a very, very steep uphill that you're landing on. And one of the issues there, obviously, assuming that you've mastered the approach and got in there, is with a very steep slope, that if you end up not judging your landing flare correctly, you could end up driving the nose wheel of the airplane into the slope that's coming up to meet you.
So far, that hasn't happened, but the perils of this roller coaster runway remain very real. Hong Kong's Kai Tak Airport checks in at number 6 on the list of the world's most extreme airports. But it had such a high rate of accidents that 12 years ago, it was closed down. These toe-curling challenges resulted in 14 major incidents during Kai Tak